I
Hi, my
usually
name's
have a
Phoebe.
script.
If you've never been to my channel before, welcome.
Make you hit that subscribe button. Hey there. Today I have a fun thing on the channel. I have an interview with Lou Cooper. Lou, would you like to introduce
Hi.
yourself?
Hi. My name's Lou. I use they keep pronouns. I'm a good friend of Charlie's. I also have been working with LGBTQ youth and activism for years. I am an assistant counselor with the camp called Brave Trails, which is an LGBT leadership camp. I created something called Connect Collective to match LGBT people up with either mentors or another pen pal, which has serviced over about 300 people. We've also done Zoom events. Um, I've been an event coordinator for my school's GSA and just all around working a lot with the LGBT community. And my relationship in regards to writing, I'm a poet, but I was an assistant director for a playwriting camp, and I do improv. Yeah, so I may not write stories, but I definitely tell them and am involved with storytelling a lot. So I understand what it's like to try and make representation happen.
First up, I want to apologize to everyone for like audio and video quality. This is over Zoom, although Lou is literally like 4 doors down. Because of the quarantine and everything on our campus, we are doing this over Zoom because it is safe. Be safe, wear a mask, socially distance, don't get the plague. All right, I want to thank you for doing this with me
Of
today
course.
and just like in general. This is my first interview, like I said before. So it is going to be a little rough, but I hope everyone enjoys it. Yeah. I also want to thank Jenna Moreci, who helped me polish my questions a little. So yeah, if I say something intelligent, it's probably because she made it sound intelligent. So, this interview is about trans and non binary representation in media fiction, specifically fiction writing, because that is what I do, and then also writing trans and non binary characters. All right, first up, for those who are unfamiliar, could you define trans and non binary for the audience, / explain the difference between trans and non binary, or if there's any overlap?
Absolutely. So basically, both transgender and non-binary are umbrella terms. Depending on the person and how they identify, those two can overlap, or they can identify as one or the other, or both. For me, I do identify as both. Transgender is identifying with a different gender than assigned with at birth. So, for example, Charlie, you were assigned female at birth.
Yep.
You identify as female and as a woman as your gender, and so she's cisgender and therefore not transgender. So I also consider non-binary people as transgender, but some people don't use that term for themselves if they are non-binary, which is why I separate trans and non-binary, even though most people would say they're the same thing, not all. So I just kind of separate those. And then binary is someone who identifies outside of the gender binary. So you could be a trans man, a trans woman, but you still exist in the gender binary, which is valid. But there are people who don't, and those people are non-binary, and I'm one of those people. So that's why I use both they them pronouns and he him pronouns. I like both of them. I connect with both of those pronouns, but I don't identify as either a man or a woman. I exist in between. And can you hear Grace? She's talking.
Yeah, I can.
I
Another
can do
thing.
the end part again.
It's cool. It's cool. Another thing for our audience, we are both in dorm rooms, which means we have roommates, and roommates might be in classes. So if you hear indistinct mumbling in the background, that is because we are not alone. No, all of my videos are extremely polished. I've never made any mistakes.
Nice.
There's definitely not chaotic ass bloopers at the end or anything like that of me just screaming fuck. So
Not a family friendly channel.
not if there is actually when you upload a video, it's like, is this content made for kids? And I'm like, no, it is not. Please do not let children watch. And if you are a child and you are watching, make sure you hit that subscribe button.
Nice. If I talk too much, let me know, because these are things I could probably ramble on about for a bit. So.
No, please do ramble, because ramble means information. So
not always. Maybe I'll go on a frog tangent. So
yes, please for the love of God, go on a frog
Are
tangent.
you sure? I don't know if that's it's information, but I'm not sure it's the information your audience wants. So you've been
True.
forewarned.
We might have to do an entire separate interview that's just about frogs.
Okay,
So
I could do
comment
that.
down below if you want that. What are some things that writers should avoid when writing trans or non-binary characters?
Oh, we're starting with a heavy hitter. I
Yes.
feel like rule number one, I feel like this is for if you're writing any marginalized community you're not
Okay.
a part of. Do not write about the experience of being that thing if you are not that thing.
Yeah.
Having diverse characters in your stories, absolutely, we love it.
Yes.
Please do that, and I'm sure you're going to ask me more about how to do that and
Yes.
what I like to see, and I will go into more of that. But do not try and explain gender dysphoria or whatever it is if you've never yourself experienced it. We can tell. Trans people can tell when you don't know what you're talking about. There's sure you might do your research and interview people, but there is really something to be said about marginalized communities and marginalized people writing about their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say avoid that. I think it's important to kind of be aware of stereotypes, but there's not a ton when it comes to trans non-binary people, as much as maybe for like different ethnicities. But a big one that we see a lot for non-binary people, especially like in film, is like robots or like non-human characters that
Oh,
are
yeah.
non-binary. Yeah. Um, I have a love-hate relationship with Double Trouble from She-Ra because I love Double Trouble. I think they're
Yeah.
super cool, but at the same time, they're shape-shifting lizard. Is
Mm-hmm.
that what we really want as our main non-binary representation? Like that's
Yeah.
literally the only thing I can honestly think of. Um, so it's definitely something to be aware of. Is we're people and um, we are more than just kind of what you may see on TikTok or um, YouTube, I guess. I don't know. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just be aware and like you're writing any of your characters, you want them to feel human. So
That was so good. That was you're great at this because the next question is similarly, what are some harmful cliches or misconceptions that should be avoided about trans and non-binary people?
yeah. So I mentioned, we're people. I think also that dysphoria or like our lives are like miserable and terrible and like or that we're different people after we come out or
Mm-hmm.
like that who we were in the past we ever never want to think about it or talk about it. And of course every trans person's experience is going to be different, but um I think a big thing also is trans people, we don't really want to talk about our dead names. Like
Mm-hmm.
you like that shouldn't be something as a writer you obsess over or
Yeah.
like or should like oh they were so much better before they transitioned or like act like that person is dead per se. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're still the same person, we're
Yeah.
just like the better version of ourselves and who we truly are, because it is definitely a problem a lot of us experience when we come out. It's like, oh, like my child is dead or
Mm.
like my son daughter is dead or like whatever that is. So making sure that's not included in media to perpetuate that kind of myth
Yeah.
and harmful stereotype is super important not to do that. But I think if you're just respectful, like you shouldn't run into many of these problems. I think at the root, many of those problems are like transphobia. Like you're
Yeah.
not going to really write about those if you have like a respect for trans people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it's just being like conscious and aware. And like if you're watching a video like this, I think like that's a great start. I
Yes.
don't speak for all trans people, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But and again, like you don't really just want to go up to like if you have a trans friend to be like, how do I write a trans
That's
character,
me with
right?
you.
But it's different. Like this is like
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Like this is like my passion. I work for these kind of
Yes.
organizations. Like I love doing this kind of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
not all trans people do, and
Yeah.
that's valid. I like to share and talk about it. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
came up to me and asked me a question, I would totally answer it. Like I don't care.
Because I've never
So
done that before.
no, not Charlie, not CB knocking on my door and being like, hey, what is the difference between demisexual and asexual?
It was aromantic, I think.
Yeah, something about that. Yeah, so I am a lot of my friends like queer information, which I love, which is
Yes, it's
great.
like, ah,
Um,
yes, I need to know something gay. Lou.
yeah. So
Let's go to Lou for the gays.
exactly. So that's what I do for CV. So
Thank
haha.
you.
What was the question? I guess I know.
Harmful cliches and stereotypes. Also, both of
Yeah.
us have ADHD, so that's just another thing for the audience to be aware of. The fact that I did have to look to the side and check my notes about what the hell we were talking
Yeah,
about.
so if this is chaotic, that is
That is
why
why.
it is the afternoon, so my meds have started to wear off.
I'm out of meds, so
Well,
we love that.
woo. But yeah, just treat us as people, and our lives in dysphoria is not crippling all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just we're people, and we have our own issues in society, and most of those issues are because of society, not because of being trans is inherently bad or
Yeah.
a struggle. Yeah.
What is the best example of rep in the media that you can think of?
The sad part is I can't. Like I literally was trying to wrap my brain. Like I can come up with good like queer
Yeah.
representation. Um oh, I just thought of one.
Okay.
Um um One Day at a Time. Love
Okay.
that show. It's on Netflix. It follows like a Hispanic family in the United States, and like it's like a sitcom, but it's like super cute. And the daughters is lesbian, and her partner is a non-binary lesbian.
Yeah.
And they're super awesome, and it's really cute and pure, and it's just like kind of a really like sweet, like innocent, like it's awesome. I
Okay.
think that's one of the only ones I can think of. Like I don't read a lot of books.
I'm gonna
I
edit
did as
that part out. Just kidding.
but like I did as a kid. Like I loved
Mm-hmm.
books as a kid. I'm sure now there's way more representation
Yeah.
in books, but when I was a kid, and even like in middle school, where I would like seek out like LGBTQ plus books, it was just L and G and maybe B. There was no
Mm.
T. So I can't really think of a lot of good LGBTQ plus rep in media. Of course, I said Double Trouble, which is iffy.
Mm.
Um, I do love them, but at the same time, it's like if we had more representation, I'd be like, yeah, but
Mm. The fact
don't.
that
It's
that
like,
is the first thing that comes first and one of the only things comes to your mind, and it's makes it even more.
yeah, exactly.
So basically, what
So
you're saying is that writers need to get on that.
yeah, like if you include, and if you think what I was thinking about this the other day. If you're writing like a mystical fantasy world or like
Yes.
a sci-fi world, doesn't it make so much sense that in worlds with endless possibilities, there's endless gender and
Yes.
like endless just kind of like, and like if you have different like species that
Mm-hmm.
maybe like the species themselves have their own like gender and whatever that means, because gender is a social construct created by Western colonialism, because before colonialism a bunch of indigenous societies had a bunch of different genders anyway. And like experiment with like pronouns of what characters you're going to use. Like neopronouns are a thing. Like there's more than just they them, and you can like have fun with it. There's like
Can you explain neopronouns a little more?
yes, I can. Neopronouns are anything that is not he, she, or they. Um, to use to describe someone. A lot of times, neurodivergent people use them, so ADHD, autism. There's other things as well that fall into that category, because often those people view themselves differently, like have a hard time conceptualizing gender and view themselves outside of like humanity or the gender binary in a different way. I feel that way. Like I also like will go by frog, like because I connect with like animals and nature more so than I do with humanity, and that is like an animal that I find gender euphoria with for some reason. So that is a lot of times why people will use neopronouns. Examples: certain people will use its. Certain people will use like Zer or Fafer, or there's lists online. There's a ton.
Hmm.
So if you have a character that is neurodivergent or that is a great way if they're also trans. If you are writing a fantasy world, I think that's a great place to use neopronouns.
Yeah.
I think it just adds more spice anyway, and it like adds more like validity to
Mm-hmm.
neopronouns. Because there's a lot of discourse online, and basically, I like neopronouns are a thing, and they
Yeah.
help people who are neurodivergent. And like, we made up words? Why can't we keep just making up words, right?
Yeah.
So, um, but just so you know, most neopronouns are mostly used by neurodivergent people. Not always, but keep that in mind if you decide to use them. But for like fantasy characters, again, some people might feel differently, but I think it would be just pretty cool to see them used in a more broad context. Again, you don't want only using like making your orcs or
Yeah,
like
that was where I was
your
saying,
like
don't make it the monsters, or don't make it only the monsters, the bad
you
guys or something
could,
like
that could
that.
be cool.
Yes.
But like don't
Don't.
just make it like
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like having the gay villain. It's okay if your
Yeah.
villain is gay, but don't have them be the only gay character.
Exactly. But I will say I love
We
me a
love gay
good
villains. Oh
yeah,
my
I love me a
god,
good
they're fantastic.
I love me a good queer coded villain. I
Especially
really
if they're
do. If you
hot, then it's like
okay. I don't okay, hot take.
okay.
Megamind is amazing. And here's why, and here's how this connects to the
Okay.
story, okay? Because Megamind subverses a lot of the traditional like tropes when it comes to like superhero movies and like
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff with which traditionally have queer coded villains,
Mm-hmm.
because it's switched on his head and he's actually the hero and he's
Yeah.
still queer coded, but he's no longer the traditional villain.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Beautiful. I love Megamind.
Also, it's a
If you want to know how to
fantastic
write,
movie.
yeah, if you know if you want to know how to
Soundtrack.
write, yeah, if you haven't watched Megamind,
You
please go
need
watch
to.
Megamind.
Like, it's a
It's so good.
requirement. Also,
Yeah.
where have you been? What have you been doing with your life?
Okay, imagine. Okay, hot take. I also think Megamind uses he they it pronouns, and you can't change my mind.
I can see that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic movie. Go watch it after the video. Finish the video, then go watch
please
it.
get Charlie her views. Get CB her views. CB catch.
Oh, down.
It's a no. It's you.
Oh,
it's the whoa. you. I throw it to you and you catch it, and you. Yeah.
I'm so bad at being a teenager. What do you find is the most valuable and important result of including trans/non-binary rap in fiction?
Amazing. Like I just think about like what like my life would have been like if the characters that I read about like when I was little like validated my experiences. I didn't know like non-binary was a thing until I was in like freshman in high school.
Yeah.
Like maybe 8th grade, but I didn't really meet or see a non-binary person until a freshman. I was a freshman in high school. So I think seeing that and getting kids like when they're little like to understand that, I have a cute story. So a friend of mine, their sister, they came out to their sister and their sister was like, oh, so you use they them pronouns like this character in this book. And they were like, yeah, I do. And I just think that's really sweet. Like that's the power of like writing like trans and queer characters in fiction, right? Like it just broadens understanding. And like I don't need to be the 5 billionth person to preach that representation matters, but
yeah,
it does.
Yeah, it does. No, I totally get it.
And I think if you do it right and you do it with like the intention that it would work for the character and their backstory, and you think it adds to them, or at least like I think it's harder with non-binary characters. You don't have to come out and say they're non-binary because they're going to use pronouns that aren't exclusively he she. They may, but like most of the time they're also going to use another set of pronouns as well, or
I realized that too, because I have a non-binary character and it was just like they weren't male or female, they weren't a guy or girl, they were non-binary, so it was just pretty simple to write them as that, just using they them pronouns.
Exactly.
And then for trans characters, I'm like, especially if they're like not a main character or a POV character, I go on to have questions about this, but like
okay, good, because it is really hard. Like I was trying to think of like if they're a side character, like how do you make a side character like canon trans, even if like you're not going to come out and say this character's trans.
Hi, my name's Billy, I'm trans.
Right? Like I think a way to do it is if they're in a situation where they're like misgendered, like, and they're like, or someone's confused, whether it's in the context of the story, maybe they're like hiding out or they have to go to a tavern and it's like,
Mhm.
ma'am, Mr. like a confusion, or people like remarking about like how they look so much like another gender. But even if they pass super well, like you may not want to do that,
Yeah.
because you don't want to do that for all your trans characters,
Mhm.
right? Because it depends on where they are in their transition, or
Yeah.
um, if they want to transition or whatnot. I'm trying to think, like, it is so, because I've never seen it really done. I'm sure it
Yeah.
has been done, but
Mhm.
I myself haven't really seen it done. Because with a movie or a TV show, you could just have that character played by a trans actor.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Um,
I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, they're trans 'cause they're
exactly.
trans." To be continued. We know that there is no right way to write any sort of character, but do you have any tips or direction for writing trans non-binary characters?
Here we go. Like, I feel like they're people. It's just a facet of their
Mhm.
identity, and if you're not like trans or non-binary, like that's not what the story's going to be about.
Yeah.
Um, like maybe it's like the love interest, and it could be, and if there's maybe like a scene that you would have to write about, if it's like a trans masculine person, like taking off their binder, which is like normally like a compression item worn, to compress like the chest area, to make it more flat appearing, um because then that would make it clear that they're trans, or if that's kind of a part of like a situation that they get into,
Mhm.
with like a romance interest. I again think would be really, that's a very touchy subject to write about if you're not super knowledgeable about it,
Mhm.
because like, um so I feel like, oh, it's so hard to just, maybe it's like part of like a fun backstory, right? Like if they're
Mhm.
like talking about like, oh, so and so, yeah, that tough guy, yeah, I heard he was a woman. He's like the so tough, like he knows the inner workings of how to like get with women because he was one. Like that would be so
So it's
funny.
like a
Like,
point of envy and not like
yeah,
he was a woman. It's the,
yeah,
oh my god, he has a leg up on us. He's like super buff and handsome. Plus he knows how.
yeah, exactly,
Lucky
exactly. So I feel like
bastard.
if you're playful with it and you're fun
Mhm.
with it, like, and you're doing it in a loving manner
Yeah.
instead of just like, oh, they're wearing a binder, their life is so hard, or like she has to pull her, like she has to tuck her penis, like, oh my god, like if you're doing that, like
Yeah.
if it's more out of like if you're treating it like comedically or just like respectfully, or I think you have to be
Comedically and
creative.
respectfully. Those have to
Yes,
be
yes, yes,
together,
yes,
not
yes.
don't play it off as like a joke. Just
Yeah,
making that
exactly.
clear.
And I think you have to be creative. And I
Mhm.
think it's important and necessary to start including trans non-binary people in your stories.
Yes.
Um, and them being explicitly so. And of course, it's harder than in just like TV shows or movies or visual media to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe in how you describe the character, you make it slightly obvious. Again, like respectfully, you don't want to be like, he's a guy but he looks like a girl situation,
Yeah.
or like it's clearly a man in a dress, but wants to be referred to as a woman, like,
That's
exactly, like maybe like she's very tall,
broad
um
shoulders, something like
yeah,
that.
but
Prominent
then
brow
like
ridge.
also
But
like
then like,
she's still like a woman, and like maybe you make it more clear that she's trans down the road, but I wouldn't say like you make all your trans characters like caricatures, or like
yeah,
all of your trans women extra tall and like
because
manly, like,
that's just not
because
how it
they're not,
works.
they're women. So you have, while you do have to include representation in your stories, I mean, you don't have to, but I you should
You
you should
should.
include representation in your stories for all kinds of people. Of course, you don't want a story where like this person's in a wheelchair, we're going to have like, and you don't want to be cramming it in,
Yeah.
but you do want to have like, you want to start including people of like all different races and ethnicities and different
Mhm.
abilities, and like queer characters, like that's a world, especially if you're
Yeah.
world building, like that's like like universes are going to have that, right? So, and to order to do that, especially when it comes to characters, you have to be creative.
Mhm.
So you have, like I gave the examples, like you have to like come up with quirky, interesting, respectful
Quirky.
ways to make them, like, to make it clear to your audience that those are trans characters. It's not as easy as like, oh, it's a woman who dates a woman, or like this person
Yeah.
doesn't have use of their arm, or this person has like olive skin, or like a way that it's very easy to make it clear the representation you're giving. In order to have good representation, you got to be creative and you got to work a little hard, but I promise you it will be so much more worth it. And you will have, even if it doesn't become super popular or big, you're going to
Yeah.
have a more loyal following
Yeah.
because they're going to see themselves in your story.
Sometimes we write about characters from groups we don't belong to. How can cis writers better their chances doing a good quality job of crafting their trans non-binary characters without unintentionally falling into stereotypes?
Do not make, if your main character is trans or a prominent character that you have is trans and you're cisgender, do not, the story should not be about them being trans.
Yes.
Rule 1. Rule 2, I mentioned this also, but it's like just like any character, like show like joy and like the good stuff. Like
Yeah.
showing trans joy and queer joy is a part of resistance, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
just, if you just show like a certain group of people like oppressed and not
Yeah.
like resisting and just being humans outside of that oppression, like you're just kind of continuing that they'll stay in that position, if that makes sense. So that goes for any marginalized community. It's
Mm-hmm.
important to show like the joy and the good moments. But then again, on the flip side, unless you're writing like a fictional world,
Mm-hmm.
where maybe the society is different, then you don't really need to do this. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? Like
Yeah.
you can acknowledge that, obviously, especially if they're a bigger, more prominent character. But don't really try and write about like the nuances or the exact feelings that they have if you yourself hasn't felt them. Like there's a lot of like cis writers that'll be like, felt trapped, knew it was a boy in a girl's body and just had to get out. Like, and you're like, I'm not an amazing writer, and I can't even write or describe my own like dysphoria or experience
Mm-hmm.
like being trans, but I know most of the time it's not like you're stuck or trapped. It's just you are not really presenting or being referred to the way you know you should be or what is
Mm-hmm.
most comfortable to you.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like if you're just like respectful and do your research and are doing it to better your story or add more representation, like, not don't it shouldn't be forced.
Yeah.
There should be a reason. Of course we want diversity, but it should make sense with the context of your story and the context of the character. Or like if they're like a friend, if they're it's like a friend group, right? Like, yeah, there might be a trans character in that. Like that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And in way you could like mention they're trans is like, oh yeah, like so and so. Oh yeah, they used to be oh yeah, like they used to have a different name, but now they go by this and use these pronouns. You don't have to mention their dead name.
Yeah.
Probably great if you don't,
Mm-hmm. Because
of your character. So like that's another way you can include representation. And I feel like, yeah, it should be intentional. It should be positive. Um, you could have negative characters who are trans, but they should not be your only characters. Like I said before, I
mm,
just want to like honestly, I just am like, now that I'm like thinking about like how you can introduce like trans characters, I'm just thinking about, especially in fantasy and sci-fi settings, how much fun you could play with
yeah.
like trans and like non-binary characters. Like there's so much you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like like you could have like a non-binary person fall in love with someone and they're presenting one way, and like they meet up with that, like they run into that like their lover or their love interest, but they're
Mm-hmm.
presenting another way,
It's like,
and create, and it would be somebody like a love triangle,
but it's the
but
same
it's the same
person.
person.
That is the only love triangle I approve of. I'm like actively against love triangles typically on my channel,
But
but I
isn't
do
that
approve of
funny?
that.
Like
Yeah,
that's like
that would be
very,
funny.
yeah, but also like incredible representation because your main character inherently has to be bisexual or pansexual.
Yeah, we don't have like the Mulan Mulan conundrum.
Yeah.
That man is not straight.
No, and Mulan is not cis.
No. Reflection. Just listen to that song and go, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's on me.
So I just like there's so much fun you can have with
Yeah.
it. And I love to like read to my kids like stories that like have like their parent like represented and like that
Yeah.
they can feel like they enjoy but also like involved with like they're so easy to fit in, especially if
In a
you're not
fantasy
writing.
setting.
Yeah,
Like, if
exactly.
it isn't this world, then have fun with it. Like, that's your job as a writer, is to be creative and tell a story. Just do it with diversity. It's not that. Anyways.
And even like if you're writing from like a culture or a historical time period
Yeah.
and you're adding fantasy elements or it's a historical fiction,
Mm-hmm.
like do your research of queer
They
people in that time.
existed. Like, the
Queer people have
stereotype that you
existed.
think. Hmm.
Queer people have existed in every culture and every time period. You just have to look for it and you have
Yeah.
like it's hard, it's sometimes it's hard to find, but we exist and we have existed through the entire history of humans.
Mm-hmm.
So that is not an excuse for to not include queer people.
Now, we already covered this, but I'll still say it again. How would you recommend acknowledging a character as trans or non-binary if the author is writing a world, i.e., fantasy, where such labels / terminology doesn't exist?
So one interesting information of like historical non-binary people is like in um North American indigenous societies,
Mm-hmm.
they often had individuals referred to as two spirits that existed outside of the gender binary. I am white, so take everything I'm saying, just
Do extra
uh,
research if you're going this
exactly.
path.
But just something to consider. Like they were often seen as like healers or people who could really understand both like multiple genders and like really can just like connect with people and often were like
Mm-hmm.
high leaders in the tribe because of the way they could just because of how they existed and identified. And so if you took that to like a fantasy setting, like of course that makes a lot of sense, like
Yeah.
someone who is kind of like genderless and holy because they're just they exist on another plane. Like doesn't it make sense that like your royalty is like a different gender on their own?
And that would be an
Like
amazing aspect of world building that would make your world unique, so it's not just the copy and paste of Tolkien.
exactly. And like if you maybe your fairies like and of course you don't want like if you have like a fairy that's like a different gender that uses maybe neopronouns or whatnot, that they like maybe their attributes are different or maybe like they have instead of like making them like coded to be women or men or whatever because
Mm-hmm.
they're fairies, right? Like they don't have to look like human tiny humans with wings.
Yeah.
Like each creature could have their own set of like different pronouns because they're a different creature. They're not necessarily um just like human because
Human
in
with
human
wings, human with
exactly
horns, human with pointy ears. Yeah.
right. So like you play with that, have fun, and like it may be different for other trans people, but especially if you like have if you do have people in your story
Mm-hmm.
and like those people you have like trans people alongside like non-binary like creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course you don't want only your creatures to be
Yeah, then
your only
that's
representation.
that is
Double trouble, Shira.
problematic.
Yeah.
Well, isn't
So
the plant Perfuma trans?
no, no.
I thought I'm
Well,
almost
it's not.
positive.
That's not. But it's not in the
That's
you.
one of the questions I had is that's I don't we can't tell as purely just consuming the media, you don't know that Perfuma is trans.
Mhm.
And of course if you go on to
And
like
so I
the
don't
wiki
like.
or anything,
Yeah,
it says
you wouldn't know,
Perfuma is
and that's the
trans.
thing, and that's like maybe that was their intention the whole time, but as I think if you're queer, you might have experienced this with Harry Potter of like J.K. Rowling going back like, oh, Dumbledore's gay. I'm like, okay, but like,
Yeah.
where is that in the
Why?
text? Like, why isn't that
Oh,
in the
look, he likes
text?
knitting.
Like that's not going to tell you anything. And I think it might be a little more difficult with trans characters because you might have to add a little more explanation or detail to like make that clear to the audience. But
Mm-hmm.
if an author retroactively or maybe even like that was their whole intention says like, oh, this character is trans, but that's not in the media itself,
Mm-hmm.
I don't count that character as trans because that author didn't commit that in their story.
Yeah. That is one of my big questions on here. Because that is such like a I've noticed that like you don't want or actually I want your opinion on this. every trans character I feel like that I've seen talks about being trans a lot.
Yeah.
Like even if
That's
it's
a good question.
like it feels like it's just like shoehorned in there.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, what great, I'm awesome representation. Why is this like the first time we get a look into like who they are? It's just it's this, and
Yeah.
it's a singular event usually. It's just like you get to know who they are, but only at that they are trans. Like, but
Exactly.
what
And I
about the
think
rest of their life? Do we get to
ex-
know their
thank
struggles?
yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's awesome. And like, if you are friends with a trans person, maybe you're not, and most likely you aren't, depending on where you're from and
Yeah.
whatnot, and that's cool. So you may not know how we exist in our day-to-day lives, um, but like, there's a difference between like always talking about your deep struggles with being like trans and your coming out experience. Like
Mm-hmm.
Charlie knows, CB
It's
knows.
kind
Like I don't do that all the time. Like that's not who I am. But I might make a joke about it
because jokes
occasionally.
are
Like
fantastic. That's our entire
exactly.
generation is just popping in jokes
So
because
like
it is an
again,
aspect.
if you're cis, especially if you're cisgender and heterosexual, like that's a touchy like that. Be careful with it, but that might be a route you could go, like
Yeah.
of like a character who just like make a remark or like they're like a trans woman like around men or whatever, and like we're missing about, oh yeah, urinals, yeah, I don't miss those, like that like
Yeah.
that is an easy, unoffensive, funny way to make it absolutely clear to your audience that that is a trans character.
Yeah.
um I the shoehorning, I understand it, like because you don't want it to retroactively, but you don't want to do that either.
Mm-hmm.
You're not like, I don't go around telling everyone randomly like my experience being trans, like I don't do that. um so it um so yeah, it's definitely, you're a writer, you got to be creative.
Yeah.
But if you want to include representation, which you should, um, you gotta maybe take an extra step, but maybe that extra step is just one little random remark, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's all it takes.
Yeah.
Uh, and for that character in the eyes of the reader to be like, oh, okay. And if you've done that character justice, if that person is transphobic or doesn't really know anything about trans or non-binary characters, and they just see a trans person living their life and is and has a great life or whatever, and like they'll be like, oh, okay, like that adds to the knowledge in their brain and
Yeah.
helps undo like the preconceived notions or lack thereof of trans characters and like queer characters and then minority characters in general. If you
Mm-hmm.
have like good representation or like a variety of representation, that can help undo like the images that we're just fed to all the time, and the knowledge that we just are given based on bad stereotypes of certain groups of people. And that's the power of writing and telling stories, is you have the power to to kind of construct the narrative of certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
If you're curious about those intersections and want to learn more about queer theory, you can always hit me up on my Instagram. I love to answer questions. Super duper Al Cooper.
Awesome.
um yeah, no, and if you're
Definitely.
curious
Oh,
about that,
people, by the way, I will link that below.
yeah, so you can, I will gladly answer questions on that if you're curious. But
Okay, last question. It is very common and recommended to seek out beta or sensitivity readers who come from the groups your characters represent. How would you recommend asking for trans non binary beta readers without sounding like a weirdo? Do you need me to find anything in there? Do you know what
yeah,
beta readers are
i
and sensitivity
i
readers?
can i can string together from context, and that
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah, I think it's super important to, like, before you put something out in the world, that you have trans people and non-binary people like kind of giving you if they like it or not. And of
Mm-hmm.
course you want the bigger sample size the better, as any study, right?
Yes.
Because every trans people is going to think things differently,
Mm-hmm.
and experience things differently. Compensate them. I mean, if you're a bigger writer and you can, if it's
For
like,
sensitivity readers, beta readers you don't pay for.
okay,
It's like
yeah,
a thing.
okay, but like sensitivity readers,
Yes, that is a
for sure,
professional you hire, and they will
yeah. And
specify
if
what
you're
they
hiring a
sensitivity read for.
sensitivity reader, like if they're like a professional, they should be a trans person.
Yes.
um you should not be hiring, even if they're queer, but they're cisgender, um they should not be they should not be your sensitivity reader,
Mm-hmm.
at all. um and I feel like it's important even with beta readers, if you like, I don't fully know how this process works. I've
Okay.
better read a little bit, but I don't know if it's different if you're like searching for a specific amount of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to like, if you have some sort of communication with them, I don't know how that works, but to just let them know like, hey, I'm a cisgender person. I really appreciate your feedback on the like explicit on the writing of these characters. Is it like obvious? Is it too obvious? Is it insensitive? Like what?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not insensitive because that's what your sensitivities reader for. But if you give trans people like and like of what you're looking for and that they can be honest with you, that's great and like that's needed so they're not like, oh, I don't know, or maybe they are trans and that's their own experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you are cisgender, you should like let your readers know so they know to like be aware of that.
Yeah.
And even if it's really bad, you won't need to tell them, they'll know, but hopefully it's not. So
Mm-hmm.
um they can just kind of look for the little things. It shouldn't be anything too big. If you are like respectful and done research, and if you watch this whole video, you have a great place to start. Um, I hope that I'm somewhat of help and that I kind of know what I'm talking about
You've
at
helped
this
me at
point.
least.
That's
Helped me
good.
a
I'm
lot.
glad. I
Yeah,
am
I'm not like
excited to
brimming
read.
with new ideas. Like, oh, I want to know
Yes,
this character
I'm
and that
excited.
character.
I
Hmm.
cannot wait to read. Like when you have a book I can read, I'm very
Well, you can
excited.
be one of my beta readers if you want,
Yes, I'd love
which
to.
I'll be getting there eventually. For second round of beta readers. Which
Woo.
yeah. All right.
But yeah, it's not too hard. I think that's a very easy like situation. You just like give it to make sure you have trans people read it before you publish it.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
yeah,
should
it's
do,
not
if you're
super
writing
complicated.
any minority group, you should
Yep,
definitely make sure you include sensitivity readers and beta readers.
absolutely.
Cool. All right. That is the end of our interview. Thank you for, not because we ran out of time, but because we ran out of questions. Thank you for
Wait,
doing
what
this.
time did we start?
4 o'clock. It's an hour long.
Nice.
Yep. It's going to be fun to edit.
Oh yeah, real fun. I
So
don't
much
envy you.
fun. Okay, I want to thank you for doing this. It will definitely be a great help for me, and I hope it is a great help for the audience. And yeah, I'm like really pumped to like write right now.
Yes.
Sadly, I should probably edit this video, but I might take
No,
some
you should
notes.
write. I want my representation. You know what you should do? You know what you should do? You should write me my little love triangle story or just
Hmm.
a little fantasy trans short story.
Okay, maybe for like a birthday.
Okay.
Your birthday's in like December.
Yeah, you got a whole year.
God, good. I have lots of time to write it, so I can procrastinate until like 2 days before your birthday. I'll be like, "Fuck," and then editing. What's that? Okay. I have a sign off thing.
Oh.
If you enjoyed your time here, I can't do it. So it was like a temporary sign off, and then it just kind of kept going. Like I just kept doing it in every video, and I have like 20 videos now, all with the same sign off. So if you enjoyed your time here with me today, make sure you hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and have fun writing.